Thank you so much for this opportunity, Isobel. It's great talking to you. You have been to Afghanistan several times over the years. And what did you see different this time in the country?
Yeah, so I last went a couple years ago. And I guess, now the shock has certainly gone because, the Taliban have been in control now for the last 4 years. And that's resulted in several different things. I mean, a lot of people told me that the situation now is much safer now that, bombs are not dropping on them, particularly in rural areas. Obviously, the Taliban have consolidated their power there, which has had detrimental consequences for women's freedoms and women's rights. I'd say that has deteriorated even further in the last couple of years since I was last there. Women and girls are still not able to go to school. Women are not able to attend so much of the workforce. They are locked out of so much of public life. And, given, I was there because I was reporting on the impact of USAID cuts as well as other international aid cuts. Billions of dollars worth of aid has been cancelled over the last few months, and that is having a massive impact on Afghan people.
Yeah, one of maybe the most painful footage in your recent report was when you were in this hospital and that baby died in front of you as you were talking to his grandma. Can you tell our audiences about the atmosphere within the hospital and what happened there?
Yeah, I mean, it was devastating. We went into the malnutrition ward and I was speaking to a grandmother there who told me that she'd just come that morning. She was very poor. The family had travelled very far because a lot of the clinics, now over 400 clinics, in fact, have been closed down since the USAID cuts. And she had got there. Her child has severe acute malnutrition as well as meningitis and other medical conditions. And, we were talking for about 2 minutes and I looked over and saw that this baby had died. And, they tried to resuscitate him, that they weren't able to, sadly. And, just watching the family, the grandmother, the mother come into the room and witness, the loss of her child was heartbreaking. And sadly, she's not the only one. We spoke to the doctor at the time who showed us around the hospital and pointed out in that moment at least 4 other children who were likely to die in the next few months because their family weren't able to get the treatment that they needed. They weren't able to afford the food that they needed. A lot of that emergency food supplies have now been cut. They're not able to, the hospital itself is completely overwhelmed. They don't have a lot of the doctors, the nurses, medical equipment, drugs that they desperately need now. So it really was a really dire, chaotic, very stressful, distressing situation.
Yeah. I'm sure you get to talk to the Taliban officials during your stay in Afghanistan. Do you think that they feel the responsibility and they are aware of what's happening across the country and they feel the responsibility in terms that this is happening to the country because of their actions and because of their inability to run the country properly?
We weren't able to speak to any Taliban officials, actually. They denied our requests for an interview, multiple requests for an interview, in fact. And, from the sense that I get, it is that, they say that they're perfectly capable of running the country without foreign aid. That is their official stance. I think if you speak to most people, doctors, nurses, teachers, civil society workers, everyone will tell you that that's not the case, that they desperately need international aid, and that the situation is far worse for the lack of it. The Taliban essentially running a pariah state because most countries around the world have not recognized them yet as a legitimate government, which means that their economy is really suffering. Obviously, they've put a huge amount into the security situation and that apparatus. And, a lot of people will say that has paid off and that they're much safer now, but that they are not, that's taking resources away from things like healthcare. And the number one issue, I think, on most Afghans' minds, and you know better than me, Sami, but is, the economy. People don't have the jobs that they need. There's not opportunities there at the moment. obviously particularly for women, but, men as well. A lot of people were telling me that they're really, really struggling with the economic situation right now, that the Taliban is not running the country effectively to look after them in that way.
So last time you went to Kabul was like 2 years ago, right? So if you compare these two visits, what are the changes that you see? And what do you see, like when you go as a foreigner to the country, what do you see that stacks with you?
As an international journalist, firstly, it's very difficult now to enter the country. I think that I first went after the Taliban takeover in 2021. I was there immediately after that, and then a year after that as well. And that was sort of for a journalist perspective, it was sort of a almost there was loopholes there. They hadn't quite organised themselves in terms of making sure that journalists weren't able to report on certain things. Now they really have consolidated their power there, and so. They're running an authoritarian country. They are ruling with an iron fist, and that makes it very difficult to report there. They realise that there is a lot of negative media and a lot of negative perception of the Taliban government around the world, but mostly because of the treatment of women and the fact that girls are not able to go to school. And their response to that is really to try and control the narrative, to try and crack down on journalists. We were followed wherever we went. Many of our conversations were listened in on. Some of our interviews were even interrupted. It became extremely hard as a journalist to operate there. And, we're foreigners, so obviously we have a huge amount of privilege when we're there. And, you can only imagine the impact that, that many Afghan women are now living under, particularly those, in places like Kabul, who,
that was one of my
for a certain
questions.
period of time did have certain privileges and freedoms.
That was one of my questions I wanted to ask and say that, Taliban have full control over, unfortunately, over media and what they broadcast inside the country. And as we know, over 500 cases of torture, detention and abuse of journalists by Taliban General Directorate of Intelligence in the past few years. And since the new law, PVPV law, the situation has become even tougher for journalists to report from the country. How was it for you to get the visa? How the Taliban did agree to give you the visa and allow you to visit the country?
Yeah, it was challenging. I last went there 2 years ago, and actually they deported me at that time and did not let me continue our reports there because, there is so much distrust from international media, and they worry that this will only add to the negative perception of their government at the moment. It took several months. We were very explicit with them as to what our story was. And, I think it was a difficult decision for them to decide whether or not to let us in. But ultimately, they don't want the world to forget Afghanistan. I think that, they want people to continue thinking of Afghans. And, ultimately, they also want to legitimize their own government. So, yeah, it was a long process, but eventually they did let us in. But obviously, as I've said, with restrictions. So operating there was very challenging. We had a reminder follow us everywhere we went and try to...
Did they give you red lines? What were kind of the stories or subjects that you were not allowed to touch during this reporting stay in Afghanistan?
No, they made it clear that they wanted us to focus on positive stories, and there were several reminders to try and focus on positive stories. They felt like there was too much of a focus on women at times, but no, there weren't boundaries to our reporting. And in fact, if there had been, we would obviously have to report very openly on those restrictions.
I remember your last report when you went to Kandahar and tried to talk to this Taliban head of madrasa in Kandahar, and he was not ready to look into your eyes and talk to you. But this time when you went to this madrasa in Kabul, the head of madrasa was ready to sit with you and talk to you directly, looking into your face. Why was this change? Is it because of different preferences of individuals, or what do you think?
I mean, as you know, Kandahar is a much more conservative culture. And so there was an element of that, I think. And, this time round, we went to a madrasa that was in Kabul. This particular individual had lived, in Pakistan in the past. He'd lived abroad before. And, perhaps he was more open to speaking to people. So, yeah, he was relatively open with us in terms of talking about, the importance of madrasas, the expansion of madrasas, and what he believed should be international funding going to these madrasas rather than mainstream schools that have obviously been shut off to half the population over the age of 12.
Yeah, and also your interaction with this Taliban judge in Wardak province, when you asked him why a woman cannot be a judge, he, I think, said that women are not mentally prepared or mentally ready to be a judge. How did you feel as a female reporter, as a human being, as a woman, when he said that into your face?
Yeah, I mean, I think his words were something like, women's brains are smaller than men's, which, I mean, ultimately, it's really not about me. I think that what affects me most, and, particularly now when I'm hearing so many stories from women across the country, is just the impact that it's having on women who, have largely been erased from so many forms of public life, not able to go to school over the age of 12, not able to work in so many public spaces, not able to go to parks, not able to show your faces, not able to travel without a mahram. Like, these are such severe restrictions on people that, a judge telling me this, like, in the moment, obviously it's insulting, but this is a man who is in charge of the fate, or in some cases, of women, and so it's devastating to hear something like that being said.
You know that since Taliban returned to power, they have built over 6,000 madrasas across the country, and they call it jihadi madrasas across the country in different provinces. But they have a lot of concentration, I think, in the southeast parts of the country. You went to one of these madrasas this time too in Kabul, and you spoke to a number of girls. I mean, the enormous energy and talent and potential in these girls are, heartwarming. But at the same time, when they say that they see no future for themselves, anyone gets heartbroken hearing that. Tell us about your interaction with them and what kind of subjects they are allowed to study in those madrasas.
Yeah, so the madrasa that we went to was actually a private madrasa. And so the majority of subjects were Islamic. So, obviously the Quran and other Islamic texts, and, Islamic languages, Arabic, essentially. They were also able to study sciences and languages and mathematics and English. But, obviously that was limited. I would say that in the public madrasas, the ones which you're talking about, I think that it's almost 90% Islamic studies. And yeah, there's a report that came out just recently actually stating just that the curriculum, in both public and private madrasas, has been rewritten by the Taliban and contains a lot of extremist content in line with the Taliban's ideology. But yeah, speaking to these girls, these are girls who are 13, 14, 15, 16 years old. They don't have any other option. A lot of the secret schools and online education and scholarships abroad, the funding for that has disappeared, although we were able to speak to one woman in a secret school. And, for them, this is one of a very privileged part of society because their family have enough money for them to pay for their girls' education. But still, they don't see any future for themselves in Afghanistan. The only way that they see a future for themselves, if they want to continue their studies, if they want to actually get jobs that they find fulfilling and satisfying, is to move abroad. And so, whether or not they're able to, that is concerning for the future of Afghanistan if, half the population is not educated to an adequate standard to be able to compete in the workplace, and, they're literally cut out of the workplace.
Yeah, according to UNICEF data and numbers, over 2.5 million girls are deprived of their basic education rights. They cannot go to school, and in the past 4 years, Taliban have flogged 1,145 people publicly, according to their own numbers, including 190 women. And only in the past month, over 74 people were flogged publicly by the Taliban. So what do you see, what do you think, I mean, my question is, what do you think, what was the feeling in those girls about their own future in Afghanistan, growing as a girl? I remember in your report, doctor told you that when he saw that the baby, the newborn baby was a girl, she said that she sees no future for this baby.
Yeah, well, I've spoken to a lot of women and girls across Afghanistan. Some of them I was able to speak to on camera, some of them I was not able to speak to on camera because of the security concerns. And again, they told me that they really felt like this had been the cancellation of their dreams and hopes and plans for the future. They didn't see what their futures looked like in Afghanistan. I was actually speaking to one Afghan woman yesterday, someone who runs a secret school in Afghanistan, and was telling me just how devastating it is to see these young girls with who are so bright and have so much potential really have their dreams dashed. And it's really heartbreaking. She was telling me that her mother grew up in the previous Taliban regime, and her mother was uneducated and never dreamed that this would happen to her daughter. But obviously when the Taliban came, she had to stop going to university. Her sisters had to stop going to school, and it's really just devastating.
Yeah, I remember when the Taliban returned to power, international media was talking about Taliban 2.0 and the notions like the Taliban have changed and things like that. What do you think that international media is mistaken about Afghanistan in total, in general, and the Taliban in particular?
I mean, there's not been a lot of international media going to Afghanistan in recent years. I think that the main thing that I've noticed is that, the news cycle at the moment is so breathless, and that, obviously there's a horrific situation unfolding in Gaza right now. There are so many international crises that seem to happen on a weekly basis at the moment. It's really difficult to keep up on. And so I think that, a lot of the international community seems to have disregarded and stopped thinking about Afghanistan. And certainly I noticed, even when we put out our report, that there was a lot of hostility, and, there was even some maybe misgivings between mistaking the Taliban leadership for the Afghan people. And I would say that, just because the country is being run by the Taliban does not mean that the entire population supports the Taliban. And of course, a lot of them do. And, a lot of them would tell us that the situation has improved for them because it is safe now and that they are not being bombed, etc. But that
not being bombed by the Taliban,
healthcare,
because they were responsible
food,
for most of the bombing.
Are just not being met right now.
They were responsible for most of civilian casualties in the past 20 years.
Obviously there was a 20-year war.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there was a 20-year war going on, obviously, between the Taliban and the US and their allies, and then, decades of war before that as well. So, yeah, I mean.
Yeah. And my last question, what was Taliban's reaction after your reports being published?
We haven't heard a direct reaction yet, and there's been no official statement on our report. So I don't know. I assume that they have seen it because they do seem to be quite clued up on, international media. But I haven't received an official response yet. Nor, I would say, from the US State Department, who we put our findings to them, and we told them about our report and the devastating impact that these USAID cuts and international aid cuts are having on the country.
And do you think they will allow you, they will issue visa if you plan to visit the country again?
I hope so. I think Afghanistan is a beautiful country. I have a great sympathy and affinity and love for Afghan people, and I really hope that I'll be able to return, but I don't know.
Thank you so much, Isobel, for this opportunity, and good luck with your future reportings.
Thank you, Sami. Appreciate it.